You already know that if you're running for more than 90 minutes or so, you need to eat something during your runs, otherwise you're going to end up hitting the wall. And whilst energy gels are technically the best option, there are actually loads of alternatives that you can use. My name's Dan, I'm a run coach and a nutritionist, and I'm here to make running less complicated for us normal runners. Fun fact, I actually got my nutritionist qualification just so that I could help my runners manage their fueling and their weight when they're training for races. Yeah, I'm that kind of nerd. But back to gels. They're not some magic creation, they're just carbohydrates and water packed into a small, convenient package that's easier to eat whilst you're running. That's it. So if you can't get on with gels, you don't like the consistency, or you're sick of companies telling you that you should be paying £3 per gel, I'm looking at you, Morton. Here are 3 alternatives you can use to make sure you don't hit the wall on your long runs. I've added links to my favourite options in the video description as well, so feel free to check them out if you want. Now, starting off with my personal favourite, just using actual real food. As long as you're using foods that are high in carbohydrates, low in protein and low in fibre, you can use whatever you want. And you have so much more choice than,
ooh, do I want an orange gel or a berry gel at mile 20?
Foods like salted pretzels, dates or dried fruits are all great options, but everybody's different, so use your training runs to experiment and see what works best for you. Using solid foods has a ton of benefits. You can vary your snacks, which is great if you're more of a savoury person like me and you don't fancy surviving off of sugar for 4 straight hours. It can also be a much cheaper way of fueling. For example, this big bag of pretzels cost me £1.50 and it's 175 grams. And a 30-gram serving of these pretzels gives me 23 grams of carbohydrates, which is exactly the same as one High Five gel. Now, running gels generally range from about £1 to £3 each in the UK, and High Five is on the cheaper end, so let's say that they're £1 each. This bag of pretzels is 175 grams, which is 5.5 30-gram servings, so it's equivalent of 5.5 gels for £1.50. So it's, less than a third of the price? However, the problem with this type of fueling is that you do run the risk of stomach issues, especially if you're not used to eating solid foods during your runs. So if you have a race coming up and you haven't done this during your training runs, do not switch now unless you want to hit every single portaloo along that route. You have been warned. Moving on to your second option, a good middle ground between regular food and gels is to use sweets or energy chews. They'll still give you energy quickly, they're still cheaper than gels, and they taste better. So win-win-win. The only cons are they're not as easy to carry when you're running. For example, I would need about 9 squashies to get the same amount of carbohydrates as I do from one High Five gel, and it's a lot harder to fit this into a running belt than it is this. And at a certain point, there is a limit to how much energy your body can process from sweets. And this is because there are different types of sugars. General rule of thumb, if it ends in ose, it's a sugar. Glucose, fructose, lactose, sucrose, they're all sugars. But the important part is that if there's just one sugar source, your body can process up to around 60 grams of carbs per hour. Whereas if there's more than one type of sugar, that number increases to more like 90 grams of carbs per hour so that you get more energy. And whilst previously the recommended advice for distance runners was usually to take 30 to 60 grams of carbs per hour, in recent years that's shifted to a higher carbohydrate intake, more like 90 to potentially even 120 grams of carbs per hour for optimum performance. But what does all this have to do with your sweets? Now, sweets are almost entirely glucose, whereas a lot of chews and gels are specifically designed to have a glucose and fructose in a 2-to-1 ratio to maximize the amount of energy that your body can absorb. Now, this doesn't mean that using sweets is going to ruin your race, but if you're a heavier runner or you're running a fast marathon time, you're going to be burning through more energy. So this is just something to keep in mind. It could be a limiting factor for you. Now, the last option is for those of you with sensitive stomachs, and if the thought of eating anything whilst you're out running is enough to make you feel ill, you're not alone. And on that note, I am thinking about making a video about how to train your gut so that you can eat during runs without feeling sick. So if you want to see that, let me know in the comments and I'll get it done. In the meantime though, you can still get plenty of carbs from liquids like sports drinks or carb powders that you mix with water. And these are great because they're much easier on the stomach, your body doesn't really have to digest anything, and most sports drinks and mixes also include electrolytes so that you're properly hydrated as well. Lucozade Sport is actually a particularly good example because one 500ml bottle has 32 grams of carbs, which is equivalent to about 1.5 High Five gels, and you get plenty of water and electrolytes too. I ran a half marathon last Sunday and I realised the night before that I had no gels, so I just carried one of these the whole way around and then stole some jelly babies from a child towards the end. I mean, she was handing them out, I'm not a monster. The only downside is if you're just relying on liquid carbs, that's going to get pretty heavy. Unless you're okay with running a marathon with a bandolier of Lucozade Sports attached to you, you do you, but that doesn't seem like the most practical thing to do. But overall, still great fueling option. As for which of these options is the best, ultimately there is no perfect fueling strategy that everyone should use. The advantage that we have as more regular runners is if we're not setting the fastest times, we don't need to go chasing those marginal gains, so we have so much more flexibility over what we can use to fuel with. Any combination of these options is going to work, so use your training runs to experiment, find out what works for you, and more importantly, what doesn't work for you. Make sure you're subscribed if you want more practical ways to improve your running, and I will see you in the next one.